Would somebody mind getting the door just to keep the hall noise? Okay, thank you. Eddie, what bills do we actually have right now that we can work on? Do we have all three agree to disagrees?
Yeah, all three agree to disagrees have now been completed by both chambers and are back in this conference.
Okay. Madam Chair, do you have a preference on where we get started? Okay. In the essence of time, do we want to take care of the easy ones first, or the if there is an easy one? But let's see, we have HCR 5011, Senate Bill 269, and House Bill 2125. Do you want to look at 269? Okay. Is there any further changes? I think we were at the 15%. Is there any other changes that need made there?
No, Mr. Chairman, we're fine with what was discussed yesterday.
Okay. Any questions from staff? Yeah, Eddie, do you want to just quickly review that?
Yeah, I can do that. The short version is that the bill is exactly as 2318 passed the House, with the exception of the budget stabilization fund threshold required for a rate reduction to take effect would be set at 15% of the prior fiscal year's SGF tax revenues, as opposed to 20%. Generally speaking, other than that, the bill would provide for reductions to income and privilege tax rates in future years when the preceding fiscal year's total SGF tax receipts for income and privilege tax exceed the FY 2024 amount as adjusted for inflation. It would apply to individual income tax rates initially. Once those are reduced to 4%, it would apply to corporation and privilege taxes simultaneously, and those would have rate floors of 4%, 2.6%, and 2.62%. Privilege taxes are bifurcated rates. I don't know if there's anything further that the Conference Committee wants.
No, Madam Chair, I think the House is good with those provisions.
Us too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we got one knocked out. Do we want to take a look at HCR 5011 next?
That would be fine.
Okay. Eddie?
HCR 5011 would be the same as the Senate substitute for HCR 5011, with the exception of the limitation would be 4% as opposed to 3%. That's kind of the short version of it. The longer version is that the bill would generally limit, for property tax purposes, the growth of the taxable value of any real property or residential mobile home personal property to 4% per year. There would be 5 exceptions to that. New constructions or improvements having been made, the subclass or class of the property changing, the property becoming disqualified for exemption, the property being first listed as escaped or omitted, or the legal description of the parcel changes, with the exception of consolidated legal descriptions would be limited to 4% above the sum of the descriptions going into consolidation. The bill would, the concurrent resolution would specify that the benefits of the valuation limitation remain in place when title is transferred, unless the legislature enacts provisions providing for exceptions to that maintenance in place. And then the bill would further specify that for tax year 2026, the concurrent resolution, for tax year 2026, the taxable appraised value would be the lesser of market value or 4% above the 2022 appraised value, unless one of those exceptions applies. The legislature would be authorized to define new construction or improvements, and the bill would be on the November 4th, 2025 ballot. I think that captures everything.
I think the House is good with all those provisions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would ask again that you consider, or did you have time to look at the August 2026 ballot?
Yes, we did. Kind of puts us in a unique position. We're arguing against the Senate's position on this, but one of the concerns that was expressed when we were talking about that start date was, if we need to have a trailer bill to identify some of the provisions, I think the Senate's done good work in putting a lot of those clarifying provisions into the amendment. I think delaying it is just going to push back a year any kind of impact of this. I think the House is going to stand pretty firm on trying to keep that general election of 2025.
Would you give us a second? We're going to visit real quick.
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know, we've had some tough negotiations. You guys have been great to negotiate with. I know there's others that would like to see that moved. We feel like you've come a long way on this. I understand where you're at, and I'm probably going to regret this, but we're going to accept your position on it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate that.
Okay, so we're in agreement on 5011 then.
Yes, sounds like we'll. Okay, Madam Chair, then I think the only thing left right now is 2125, and I do want to make you aware, Madam Chair, I've got some significant concerns about that date and the election piece. Currently in the bill, we have that the local officials, the local governments need to notify the clerk by June 15th if they need to have that question put on the ballot. Essentially, that June 15th date could be, if the election was August 2nd, that could be a very quick turnaround on when they would have to create those ballots and go through all their processes. I'm not a county clerk. I'm not exactly sure, so I did make a few phone calls in the time this afternoon that we've had. Some of those said it takes up to 30 days to get those prepared, especially if they weren't even planning on having an election. If one entity would contact the clerk and say, we need to exceed that threshold and get this on the ballot, that would require them by May 15th to try to have that in. I'm not sure what our solution is there, but I don't want to complicate the county clerk's job and the duties that they have, so not sure if we can take another look at that, but I really think that June 15th date is going to be unattainable for the county clerks.
So what do you suggest we do, Mr. Chairman? I think we've got a good piece of legislation. I don't want to lose it. And I think there's a misconception out there, as you explained it very well. They don't need the valuations for this number. It's their previous year's numbers in the CPI index.
Yes, that's correct. I think the confusion there, some of the local governments thought that the exceeding revenue neutral rate was going on the ballot. It's not that. So they don't need that valuation certification to calculate that mill levy. However, they will need to know, I mean, they've got the information from the prior year. So they've got the taxes that they levied last year. They've got the inflation. I'm not sure if they would have, by May 15th, if they would have the data that they would need to calculate like growth, and they would know obviously if there was any voter approved bonds or anything, but just to get that information by May 15th, you know, a lot of local governments are just beginning their budgets. I don't know if they would have a good idea by then whether or not they would need to exceed that.
So, Mr. Chairman, we have until June 1st to file to be on those ballots. So I don't know if we made it June 1st as the notification date. Wouldn't that work? That would be moving at 15.
I actually asked the county clerk that question, and they said that the lady that I visited with said they already know there's an election. They know they have that ballot kind of pre-prepared, and they just have to fill in the names once that June 1st deadline hit, because that's the exact same thing I thought about is, wait a minute, our filing deadline is June 1st. However, if they're not planning on having an election, because they've kind of got everything ready, they just have to fill in the names. And if they are not planning on having that election, and then all of a sudden they find out they do need to have an election, there's more to the process. I'll be the first to admit I'm not sure what all that entails. But I just have concerns that we would be putting a mandate on them that wouldn't be attainable.
So, Mr. Chairman, do you have a suggestion? Because I'm wondering, I mean, they don't know if any names are going to go on or not. They know the positions. They know the taxing entities. So to me, it would be a similar logistical process.
Right, and if we were having a hearing on this bill, I would love to visit with the county clerks and be able to kind of flesh out what exactly the problems might be. But unfortunately, unless we just go back to a protest petition, I don't really know what other solution we could do to alleviate that concern.
So are you suggesting we pull that provision in the legislation?
I don't want to, because I know we've put a lot of work into it, but I just fear it might fail if we leave it in there, so I'm open to suggestions.
Let us think about it for a minute, Mr. Chairman, and then we'll, okay, just a second.
I just had a thought. I'm not sure if this would be acceptable or not, but I think the only way to alleviate this without going back and undoing things would be to postpone the implementation until next year.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's interesting. We just discussed that a little bit, but if we did that, then why not hold off until next year on the policy? But our fear is somewhat what your fear was on 5011, that they see it coming. But that's another misconception on this legislation. It doesn't stop them from increasing their taxes. It just, maybe we delayed the election portion for a year and put the rest in place. I don't know.
So what would be in play if we remove the election provision? We would no longer have the ASTRA fund either, because that kind of plays into the election. So you would, and we've already delayed the revenue neutral notice changes till,
We would just be paying for the revenue neutral in 2025 and 2026, which we're not doing.
okay.
That is in that legislation. I really hate to lose the Astra trigger. I think that, I don't know, I think, yeah, we've had some really positive comments on it. And you don't think June 1st would work? Since that's our filing deadline?
No, I agree, and like I said, I asked that specific question, but when you get ready for that election, again, I said, I'm not an expert on this, but I know you have to notify the Secretary of State. I'm not sure if there's a certification or approval that you have to get from the Secretary of State on your ballots or what, but the county clerk was doing a very good job of explaining it to me, and I was soaking in about half of it, if that. So I fear unintended consequences, and that's the part of this job I hate the most, is we try to do good work, but we don't know what we don't know, and that's the only hang-up I have on that.
Let's think about this for a minute. I don't
Okay.
mean to bog this down, but it's too important. You put so much time into it. I think we really came up with a good product. We just need to figure out the logistics on the election. Let's think a minute.
Okay.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I did have a question, Mr. Chairman. When you visited, that mic's right in the way, isn't it? When you visited with the clerk, you what I heard was that they indicated they go ahead and sort of put a ballot together knowing there are certain offices. If they put in there expecting there to be an election for the taxes, is it not pretty simple then just to back that off if they already had it, or did you even talk about that possibility?
We didn't really talk about that per se, mostly, and I'll be fully transparent here. It was the county clerk from Saline County. And I thought that was kind of a medium, moderate-sized county. It's not a small rural county. It's not one of the larger ones. I kind of wanted to see how the primary election would work for them. And they always have that even year primary when they have all the statewide offices and all the representatives are on the ballot. They have county commission seats, a lot of your local offices. It's the odd years where they rarely have city school candidates. They don't have enough to call for that competitive primary election. If they're not expecting an election, they don't spend the time necessarily doing all that preparation work just in anticipation that there might be, because in the even years, they know there is going to be a primary election regardless. So I didn't necessarily ask her, I don't know if that answered the question, but they just, where they don't usually have a odd year primary, that's not work that they do in anticipation of. I suppose they could with this, and then if there didn't end up being anything on the ballot, that would just go away, any work that they'd done to prepare for that.
I guess I'm thinking, Mr. Chairman, in today's world with technology, computers, you just have a thumb drive or a program, something where you have the ballot all ready to go. You have to plug in names, you have to plug in the entity that's increasing taxes. And I don't know, I had a thought, I'm going to just say something to my chair.
So, Mr. Chairman, we were actually thinking the same thing. Possibly a special election in odd years, and then the June date, even years. We would start out with the odd year this year so that they could have a special election. I think that was in prior language. It was September 15th. Is that correct, Amelia?
It'll take me just a minute to look up the statute number, but the language I was thinking about was there was language in another provision at one point where there was a special election was allowed, but as part of that, a special election could be a mail ballot election. And I believe the provision relating to that was a September 15th date for the mail ballot, but I'll need to look at it real quick to confirm that.
Mr. Chairman, would that be something that we could consider for the first year to get us started, and then we could take a deeper dive next year during session, but that would allow the election for this year?
Could we make it either or? Because there might be some counties that have enough on the primary to actually have that primary election in the odd years if they have city school elections. But if not, that gets around that window that you're not supposed to have any other elections between the 45 days. So if we could make that an either or, if you don't have a regular primary election authorized, and I think the September 15th date works perfect for budgeting purposes, because then they would still have till the October 1st, should the election fail, they could go back in and modify their budget and then get the new budget adopted.
I think that's a good working start, Mr. Chairman. And we like the or option.
And the statute I was thinking about, which related to mail ballots for the cities and counties tax lid election, that was the previous tax lid election provisions in KSA 2543 433A, the mail ballot election was to fall on September 15th. September 15th. And there was also a provision in there that the city or county would certify to the county clerk and the election officer for the county no later than July 1st that the election was necessary.
What do you think, Mr. Chairman?
I can't find a reason to disagree. I think that's workable.
Okay. And we would start with the odd year with that language and then take a deeper dive on it next year. Would that be feasible?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be some cleanup needed on this statute once we've got a year under our belts.
Should we leave it September 15th on all years then, or attempt to make it the August election?
Honestly, I think I like the September 15th better, but that's just a personal preference. Don't have any reasoning behind that.
Well, to really confuse it, we could make it optional again for the locals,
Yeah,
that they could decide the August ballot or the September 15th, because there would be a cost involved with the 15th.
yes. Yeah, you'd have a special election. Yeah.
So we make it the June, well, I'll wait to see.
Repeat the question. I apologize. Oh, okay.
So do we want to add that provision then? Do we want to move that original June 15th date up to like June 1st, like the regular filing deadline?
For a September 15th ballot or for the
No, I meant
August ballot?
if it's an August election, they would need to know by June 1st
Okay,
what's on the ballot.
and then we give the option for the September ballot? Okay, I
Yes.
think we're all thinking the same thing. Okay.
I think staff might have a follow-up question based on that statement. You use the term option for the September 15th mail ballot. Whose option? And what are the requirements for that option? You can kind of flesh that out for us.
I think we were thinking optional for any taxing unit that was attempting to exceed the Astra amount.
I think we should probably leave it up to the county clerk, though, because they would be the ones administering the election. They could decide whether it'd be on, if they wanted to go ahead and hold a primary, or if they wanted to have that special election.
Yes, I think, yes, absolutely.
Right. So the follow-up question is there going to be a date for the county clerk then to notify maybe the taxing jurisdictions so they know whether they need to meet that June 1st deadline or the July 1st deadline for a mail ballot? Like when they need to notify the county of whether
I
they
would
need-
suggest, Madam Chair, for consistency, that everybody would have to make that notification by June 1st, and then the clerk could make the determination, if they do not have a regular election already scheduled, if they wanted to have that as a special election for the September 15th. Would there be any reason that they would need to know earlier than September 15th? I mean, I can't think of a situation. They still have till October 1st now to certify their budgets. I was just thinking out loud, so.
It's a good thought.
Turn my mic
I'm
off.
glad you're thinking through the logistics, but since we are moving the deadline for October 1st, it could take more than 2 weeks to certify that election, so maybe we just pick September 15th because that was the language that was in prior statute.
Usually they would be able to canvass and certify that election within, what is it, a week or?
25433A actually, which is the mail ballot September 15th statute that Amelia was referring to, references that the County Board of Canvassers shall conduct the canvass no later than the 5th day following the date of the election.
Okay. Would we put that language also in there as well then?
From the reviser's perspective, I think we would anticipate amending that statute that currently isn't being used because that tax lid no longer exists, but using similar language for a provision for this situation.
Okay,
A similar
Makes
similar
sense.
concept.
okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good solution to not lose the work that you had done and that this committee had done, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's the best solution we have at this time. Staff have any further clarification or any questions?
We're speaking about there's the 45-day essentially prohibition on having an election outside a primary or a general. To meet the September, new proposed September election, we'd probably need an exemption from that rule that exists. Because otherwise there'd be no way to satisfy that 45-day requirement.
Okay, because, yeah, if they had a primary, if they did have a primary, would we just mandate that they, if there is a primary already happening, because that September 15th day would be 45 days out from the general, would it not?
I think by our math, we're outside the general, it would just be the primary that would cause the issue.
Okay, because could we put some language in that if they, how would we do that? Just mandate that it had to be on the primary if they were already having a primary election, and then to the counties that did not have a primary, they could either elect to have that regular primary election or have the special election. Would that cover that exemption?
Staff was just discussing the scenario where some portion of a taxing entity may have a primary due to a primary election for a different taxing entity that overlaps it, but of course, taxing entities of various types do not necessarily follow the same boundaries. And so how to accommodate this in that scenario, and we think that the most straightforward way to do so would be to provide that if any portion of a taxing district is subject to a primary election, then the entirety of it would go on the primary ballot for that taxing entity. It's the nearest thing. Of course, that kind of raises the question, would you then potentially bootstrap further taxing entities into it by virtue of that? And I think you would have to under that circumstance.
Yeah, that brings up a good point, because not all taxing districts are going to be similar. Yeah. So does that clarify, or is that how we need to write that?
Staff just wanted to clarify how you wanted to handle that.
Mr. Chairman, I think would you review where we're at now? And I just want to make sure where we are on the election and the options.
Okay.
And then I think that language that they suggested, the clarification, if it's in the district, if it's like a Venn diagram, then if it touches it, it would be part of the requirement.
So my understanding of where you're at, and staff has had a few side conversations while at the same time as conversations, so please don't hesitate to correct me, is that in even numbered years, it would be on the August primary for everybody. That's relatively straightforward and resolved. In odd numbered years, if there is a primary election, it would go on the primary ballot. And if there is not, it could be conducted by virtue of a mail ballot election on the September 15th date as provided for in, I believe it's KSA 25-433A. And the key thing to resolve there is that if any portion of the taxing entity's territory would otherwise have a primary, including potentially otherwise have a primary for the purposes of a different taxing entity's election pursuant to this provision.
And all notices would be June 1st?
Yeah, our understanding was that June 1st is now the date for everybody, kind of in all years, all circumstances.
Okay.
And when I say for everybody, I mean all taxing districts to notify the county clerks of the need for an election.
All righty. So is there any further clarification you need from us on that?
I don't think there's any further clarification as long as everyone's in agreement as to what, Eddie just kind of described, to make sure that's the agreement reached on this particular issue.
I think we're good.
I think I'd almost go back to designing the revenue neutral form. That was a lot of details to go over here. And like I said earlier, unintended consequences, sometimes these things have a domino effect, so.
No, it's like putting a software system together, Mr. Chairman. The devil's in the details, and I'm glad we're looking at it this closely.
Okay.
So, do you want to go over the provisions that we have in 2125?
Overall, yes.
Yeah, I think we have a decent product here.
So the bill would create, in essence, a property tax funding limit, except as otherwise approved at an election of the version of Senate Bill 35 that passed the House, with the exception of an additional 4% ceiling to that increase prior to the limit taking effect. In order to exceed the limit, taxing entities would be required to notify their county clerks by June 1st of their intent to exceed the limit. The county clerks would then, in even numbered years, be required to put that on the primary election ballot. In odd numbered years would be required to put it on the primary election ballot if a primary election ballot exists anywhere within the territory of the taxing entity. And if not, they would have the option, is my understanding, of providing for a September 15th mail ballot election, as is currently described in KSA 25-433A. Beyond that, the bill would provide for the creation of the Astra Fund and transfers to that fund, demand transfers to that fund from the state general fund of $60 million in the first year, and increasing by 2% per year in future years. The Astra Fund would be apportioned across the 105 counties, and then of each county's apportionment, the county government and each city government within the county would have a proportionate amount of that based upon the assessed value used to calculate property taxes levied in the preceding year. Taxing entities exceeding the property tax funding limit or seeking to exceed a tax limit would not receive their proportionate amount from the Astra Fund, with the exception of counties which seek to exceed it and have an election which is not approved by the voters would receive 25% of their allocation. Any amounts that are not paid to cities or counties by virtue of either exceeding the threshold or seeking to exceed the threshold at an election would go back to the state treasury to the credit of the Astra Fund, and transfers from the SGF to the Astra Fund in future years would be reduced by the amount that is in the Astra Fund by virtue of that return of funds. The state treasurer would be required to provide the report to the tax committees as provided for in the underlying Astra Fund bills. I believe from there we move on to the municipal budgeting date changes, which provide for October 1st to be the deadline for all budgets to be certified to the county clerk. It provides for the county clerk to use the previous year's budget information and property tax levied for any entity that does not certify its budget by that point in time. And it also changes from December 1st to from December 15th to December 1st, the date by which county treasurers are required to mail property tax statements. Next, moving on to the revenue neutral rate provisions, it extends the state reimbursement of that for 2 additional years, and then it makes changes to the revenue neutral rate notice form beginning in calendar year 2026 to include a column indicating the mill levy utilized in the kind of 3 center columns on the previous form, to eliminate the column in the lower piece portion of the form that specifies the amount by which the proposed tax amount exceeds the tax rate at the revenue neutral rate, and then to include information for the aggregate amount of tax levied by each taxing subdivision for the current and prior year and the difference between such amounts in both dollars and percentages. It then also revises the reference to maximum tax with proposed tax. Next, the bill reauthorizes the statewide school finance mill levy for 2 years, and then it provides the final 2 provisions are the personal property tax exemptions provided for by the House Tax Committee version of Senate Bill 10, and the Board of Tax Filing Fees prohibition provisions provided for, once again, by the House Tax Committee version of SB 269. And I believe that captures everything in the bill.
Provisions from Senate Bill 10 also?
That's what I
You did say.
That's what I said right before 269. It's the House Tax Committee version of Senate Bill 10.
Thank you.
Earlier today, the conference committee did rename the Astra Fund to once again still the Astra Fund, but with A standing for advancing in lieu of acknowledging.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Madam Chair, I did want to express one concern I still had on the 4% cap that included inflation. Completely agree with that. I was kind of looking out for some of the faster growing, rapidly growing communities if we were going to exclude some of that new growth, so that wouldn't be under that 4% cap. But then I also got to realizing after a few conversations with some folks back home, in small areas, in the county north of me, they've had a beef processing plant that's been proposed and a flour mill that's been proposed. In a small community, you have a facility like that that goes in. It requires a lot of infrastructure to be put in. There's a lot of housing that is going in because of those projects. You know, the tax base is growing, and the requirement on local governments to provide more infrastructure is also growing. I thought this was an urban issue, but it actually can impact some of the small rural areas. So I didn't know if you would take one more consideration. I know we'd proposed that. Didn't know if you would be able to be willing to pull out the new growth and hold that separately, not underneath that 4% maximum cap.
About it. Give us a minute.
Certainly. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I know we closed on 5011, but we really don't want to add new growth to 4%. But if you're willing to move the date on 5011, we'll take the new growth.
I'll accept that.
Really? Wow. I'm in trouble now. I didn't want you to take the new growth. Mr. Chairman, wow. Okay, I guess I can't back down on my offer. I never saw that one coming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Apologies.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and I do know that the definition of new growth can be vague. It has to absolutely be new growth, not remodeling, not, because there have been people that have remodeled theaters or other properties, and they have used that as new growth. And we cannot accept that. This has to be absolute new buildings and new facilities for 1 year.
Yeah, there is a statute that I found that had a definition for new construction. I'm trying to remember. Eddie, was I talking to you when we were discussing that? I can't remember who I was talking with that about. Let me see if I can find that.
It was not me, but I'm guessing we had the same conversation with the same individual, and I'm trying to recall the statute number as well. But I believe 2396 and 35 included language related to new growth.
I think it was 79-1460H. H. I just recalled that from memory, so that might be the wrong reference.
Yeah, the existing definition within SB 35, we think is substantially similar to what exists in 79-4060, 1460H, and that is attributable to the taxation of the construction of any new structures or improvements, or the remodeling or renovation of any existing structures or improvements on real property, excluding ordinary maintenance or repair of any existing structures or improvements on the property.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's my concern. Remodeling should not be part of new development. That has been existing. It's been on the tax rolls. It's been, there's no way that should be part of the exemption. I'm not a fan of excluding new development. I never thought you would take that offer, or I wouldn't have made it. To me, the 4%, now, we heard last night Johnson County was at 1.2% new growth. So now the ceiling is 5.2% for Johnson County. It would be 4%.
If inflation was 4% and then the new growth was another 1.5 on top of that, yes, that would be correct.
Yes. Well, not inflation, 4%, it was CPI, your equation, or 4%, whichever was lower is the equation. So you're right. If the CPI came in lower, then they would have a lower ceiling. But if the CPI came in higher, then 4% would be the ceiling. So we're looking at 5% now for a ceiling. I just feel like that's a lot of government growth. But boy, we've been seeing much more than that lately. So I just don't get the new growth. And I know that local governments argue for it all the time. But to me, it's, you know, especially in Topeka, I mean, those roads are paid for by, what are they called, specials? So the
Special assessment.
yeah, the property owner's actually paying them. So they keep saying, oh, we need the new growth to increase your property taxes, when they didn't even pay for it. The specials paid for it. So I'm like, what a double standard and a misdirection of what's actually going on. But we did make the offer. I won't back down on it. But I do want to exclude remodeling. It needs to be new buildings, new development.
Okay, in that statute that we'd referenced, and I can't remember what Senate Bill 35 originally said, it does include the fact that normal repair, replacement, or maintenance is not included in the definition of new construction. So if you're just remodeling something that, like if you're putting new windows in or a new roof, that shouldn't be under new construction. But if you're taking a bedroom and making it into an office, or I'm not sure how detailed the appraiser gets on what they consider remodeling, but if there's remodeling that actually increases the size and scope of the property or the building, would that be considered, or what? I'm just trying to make sure we understand each other on what.
Yeah, we're thinking it has to be new construction. And Mr. Chairman, you know, I think about this, and logically, it makes no sense as a taxpayer, because, like I said, the local governments argue that they need to increase their budget because they have new development, new growth. But then, on the other hand, they're asking for all these tax incentives and tax breaks so that they can create new development and new growth. So when does the guy that's been there for 20, 30 years get the tax break? No, they get the increase because of the new development. They get to pay for the tax breaks for the new development. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I've got kids and we play Uno every once in a while. Do you want a reverse card if you want to rescind your motion? I understand there's some contention there, and I don't want you to agree to something that maybe perhaps isn't what you wanted to offer.
Let us think about that. Okay, Mr. Chairman, and I don't play Uno, so I don't know the reverse card, but I do play golf, and I'll take a mulligan. So let us visit real quick. Mr. Chairman, could we take a 10 or 15-minute break and come back on this?
Certainly.
Okay, because we really appreciate you on this. I know it's a big deal, and we just want to run some numbers really quickly.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. For your patience, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make clear, I did make the offer, and I will stand by my offer. Are you okay with taking remodeling out, making sure, and using that language that you read? Is that, okay?
Yeah, my problem there is if the appraisers have this programmed, the definition of what new construction is, if we have differing statutes that have a different definition, how are they supposed to account for that when they're assessing the property?
Well, that's part of our problem on the valuation equation and why we went with that limit. So, Mr. Chairman, if you're willing to accept the offer, then that's what we made, so I'll honor it.
With the definition as it is?
I don't see any other way around it at this point.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Do you want me to accept or not?
Oh. It's up to you, but, yeah, we did make the offer. I won't use a reverse card. I'll leave it on the table.
Okay. Well, let us chat about that.
Thank you. And just, the new construction is 1 year, so it happens for 1 year, and then it goes away the next year, too. So that value resets.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay, yes. If you would chat and whatever you decide, we're good.
So I just want to clarify the offer that was made before to change the date on the constitutional amendment and then pull out essentially the new construction from underneath the 4% cap. Is that?
So actually, what I was thinking of it was the CPI index, new construction, and bonding was one net value, or the lesser of 4% plus new construction is how I interpreted what you were looking for. Is that not correct? Right, and so the new construction would be in both calculations, so you're basically, whichever's lower, 4% plus new construction, or CPI Midwest Index plus new construction plus the voted on bonding. And it would be whichever's the lower of the two. So you increase the value. We knew 4% was the threshold, and now it's increased based on new construction, that's my understanding of what you were looking for.
I think that's our interpretation too, if that's clear from the staff's perspective.
Clear as mud. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I think we'll go ahead and accept the offer, so.
And I didn't make that for the record. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand there's grief on both sides, and we do what we can. We play the hand we're dealt.
Right.
Thank you.
Is there any further questions on 2125?
No, I don't have any.
clarification staff needs on any provision?
I don't think we need anything on 21, 25. We will need your clarification as it relates to 5011 now and what the date
Yes.
change means.
Yes, because we need to also change the implementation date, because if we're going to push it back to 26, we probably need to go with January 1st of 27 for,
Mr. Chairman, that's, again, there's other parties at play here, we all know. I don't agree that that's the best possible language, but we absolutely do have to move that start date back now.
okay,
There's no way it can start in 26.
correct.
Yeah.
I think the only other question is, are you leaving the 2022 link the same, though? Okay.
Yes, that's the intent.
So the 2027 value would be 4% greater than the 2022 value unless an exception applies. So just, okay. And what date is it in 2026?
August.
August, okay.
Yeah, I didn't have the exact date, but it'd be the primary election in 26, yeah. Madam Chair, I wanted to, we had discussed the possibility of retaining Senate Bill 35 back to its original contents as it passed the Senate floor and also the House Tax Committee. If you're willing to go ahead and move on that one, I think that one, we didn't have any proposed changes to that unless you had any suggestions. We liked that bill, and if you want to move that one forward, we'd entertain that.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a great idea. That would be a good piece of legislation, and since the 5011 was delayed till 2026, I think it's even more important that we run 35 this year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want to kind of a brief rundown on what 35 was?
35 would eliminate the state's 1.5 mil levies. It's actually two levies, one mil levy and 1/2 mil levy, and it would create SGF demand transfers to the Education Building Fund and State Institutions Building Fund, kind of in lieu of those levies. I actually don't have the numbers open in front of me in terms of what those transfer amounts would be. If you pause for the website to open. The transfer amount for the Education Building Fund, I believe, would be $56 million in FY 2027 and would be adjusted in future years to reflect the average percent change in taxable value of all property in the state for the preceding 10 years. The transfer to the State Institutions Building Fund would be $25 million in FY 2027 and would increase by 2% of $25 million in each future year. That's the entirety of the provisions.
So when does that start? When does that 1.5 mils come off of the property tax
If
statements?
it's written in tax year 2026 is the way that is.
Okay, so it would still be in place in 2025, and then next year it would come off. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, tax year 2025 would be the last year of the levy.
Okay. Okay, Madam Chair, I don't think we have any questions regarding the policy.
Mr. Chairman, we're good with Senate Bill 35 as is. We would ask that you would consider 2231. I know you're not real excited about it. I don't know if there's anything we could do to sweeten it. Maybe put the provisions from 2336, if that would help.
Again, my biggest concern on the tax freeze, I want to make sure, we were in favor of the personal exemption updates, that head of household, the disabled veterans increase, provisions of that. I just had some concerns about the additions of the tax freeze program changes, and I know when we were working on the single factor at 2336, we worked very diligently to try to make sure that was kind of a net zero. We did end up with a $13 million in that third year. We did have a small impact there, but we were trying to manage the fiscal note to where there wouldn't be a significant impact. If we added that third year of the tax freeze changes, according to Eddie's chart, that has almost a $27 million fiscal note. I understand that's tax relief, so it's really hard for me to argue against that because I really like the fact that we're trying to make an effort towards tax relief, but.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, it would be a provision that the Senate has a position on and a provision the House has a position on, and we could just let our bodies decide whether they want to move forward on it or not. But it's up to you, Mr. Chairman. I would appreciate it. I don't know. I feel like we had a really good product last night, and it just doesn't feel so good moving forward. But I don't know. This might take the sting out a little bit. But.
Right, and I think, I don't want to negate the work that we've done in conference so far. I think we've got a lot of good, big policies addressed.
So, Mr. Chairman, if we delayed it a year, the expansion of the freeze, I know then it would be in statute, and we could take a look at those other programs. I know I've already requested an interim committee on a couple of things, and we could add to this. I think you're absolutely correct that all three programs need to be looked at. I think they should be combined into one and have thresholds for certain levels. But that's something we can't do in a conference committee. We're just trying to sweeten the offer a little bit to see what you might think, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that. That's part of a negotiation, so would you mind giving us a moment to discuss that? Madam Chair, I really appreciate your negotiating skills and the offer. We just aren't quite there yet, and we'll have to maybe have some further conversations. I'm sure we'll be back in conference the rest of this week. We do have some other outstanding items. I think we lost one of our shells, though, as far as tax conference 227. Did that get new conferees in the Senate?
It did.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think we have quite a few agreements, but I don't know whether it'd be worth sleeping on a couple of them before we say the final word. I know the revisers would like to know tonight. I think 2275, we're all firm on that, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yes, and I think Senate Bill 35, we're definitely firm on it.
Yes.
And we are definitely firm on 269.
Correct.
And so I think we're in agreement unless something changes this evening on 21, 25, and 5011.
Yeah, unless there's something technical that we find that we need to clarify, I think we're all ready to go on those.
And, okay. So, Mr. Chairman, did you want to move on 69 this year, the rural opportunity zone, or? Mr. Chairman, how about, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to clarify, did we determine if that expires this year, or will we have time next year to come back and renew that next year if we need to? Okay.
Yes, you did ask that question, I believe. Was that yesterday?
It's been too long. I don't know when it was.
Okay. So Senate Bill number 69, for the background information, the current provisions for the student loan repayment provisions, those currently expire. The enrollment date currently expires June 30th of 2026. And then the income tax credit provisions would expire after, or the last year of the income tax credit right now would be tax year 2026.
Okay. Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we don't have any problem extending that. There were some expansion pieces that I think the House tax would like to take a further look at, so I think we would probably like to hold on that one until next year.
That's fine, Mr. Chairman. I was getting a jump on it this year so that it didn't expire. I did not anticipate those amendments, but they did go on, and would like you to take a look at them. So I guess that would be it. If we can't get you to move on 2231, I don't see anything else. Do you?
No, I do not, and let us continue to have conversations, perhaps tomorrow if we need to call for another conference. Certain, we've still got that bill in play, and I'd like to find a path forward if we can.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and all the work that has gone in. I know it hasn't been easy, but I think Kansas taxpayers will be better off for the work that we've done.
I think it's been a very productive 36 hours, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
We set up a time to sign the reports tomorrow. Would that make it easier for the revisers? Or we can just do like we usually do?
Probably easier at this point if we just come find you. We'll come find you and get the signatures.
Thank you.